We might be able to work that out, but okay, let's get started back up. Hopefully it'll stop flickering and we won't have a stroke soon. So we were right at the point where we're talking about some of the different ways of writing code so that you can have the box model, things displayed a certain way. So we got top right, bottom left. Those are the four things we got here. We could also say top, bottom, right, left. We could also say top, left, right, bottom, individually. It really depends on what you're doing. If you're only going to set one of them, it's just as easy to say padding right. In a lot of other cases, it's easiest just to say padding and then specify all four of them. It really is up to you. But mostly, like I said, you can choose any of these you want. Nobody's going to second guess you. It's really just you need to understand what it means when you see it in somebody else's code. Because most of what you do as a developer is not with your own code, unfortunately. You got to read other people's nasty code. You know that 40,000 person deployment that's happening right now? There have been 3 or 4 different developers that works on that code, that have worked on that code over the past 7-8 years, and it's been patched, and 10 different little scopes of work run on it. So what I'm trying to tell you is it's a mess. And looking at that stuff, and you got 3 or 4 different coding styles, and that means like, oh, if statement, there's only one way to write it. No, you can write if statements with the brace on the line, on the next line, give a little space. You can do one-line if statements. In some languages, you don't even have to have the braces. You just kind of put it all in one line, and it's a one-line if. Just different styles. Looking at that stuff, what I'm trying to get across is there are multiple different ways of accomplishing the same thing. If it works, that's what matters. It makes it easier if it's all one style. And if it's your code, it's easiest because you know you did it. Even if your code sucks, you can forgive yourself a lot easier than you'll forgive somebody else. That's just human. And actually, after you learn C#, I will take snippets of the code that is going live today and show you how bad it is. You know why it's bad? I wrote the original part. My fault, but I wrote it 7 or 8 years ago. And I wrote it in a technology that is now way obsolete. You got to remember, we're in technology, so anything 2 or 3 years old is dinosaur. So I wrote it in ASP.NET MVC. No, it was MVC, and MVC was just beta kind of at that time. And it was C#, but it still has what they call alligator brackets. You'll learn about that in C# in about 2 weeks. It's old style syntax. So everything we're doing now is a different style. It looks different. It feels different. It's faster. It's better. I go back and look at my own code from like 6 years ago, and it was the hotness back then. It's horrible. And it's a pain to even look at my own code. You're coding for your future self, so keep that in mind. Try to make it clean, because when you come back and think, oh, I was feeling clever that day, you're not going to feel good about it. So, padding. Top, right, bottom, left. There are not many things you have to memorize to be effective and efficient. This will help you. Now, there's also another one, margin. So somebody tell me quickly about what's the difference between margin and padding.
Margin is on the outside of the box, and padding is on the inside of the box.
That's all there is. The answer was margin is on the outside of the box, or whatever you're styling, and padding is on the inside of the box. That's it. If you remember that, you got it. So over back here, so that's the inside of the box, and right now I've got padding 100, 30, 30, 100. Okay? And you know why this is looking really strange? Because we specified, it's flickering, isn't it?
Yeah.
We specified a height Oh, by the way, here's another little feature I just inadvertently showed you. It's in your Chrome debugger window here. You can uncheck something without deleting it, and it will temporarily undo it for you. That's why it's a little crossed out. You don't have to delete it. You can delete it. I mean, you can double-click and get rid of it entirely. But you just want to see, what happens if I take that off? You can uncheck it. And that looks a whole lot better. This is more the normal way of styling things. You don't often specify exactly the height of something. You style the padding. So if you have 100 above or 30 above and 30 below, if this text gets bigger, it's still going to look good because I've got a little bit of buffer above, a little bit of buffer below, and buffer on the right and left. I could be huge, but it's still going to look good. If I specify the height without the padding, it's kind of like it's not going to take into account what's in the box. So it's much better to flow with whatever data comes in the box, whatever text is in the box. So I'm going to get rid of that height because we don't need it anymore. So we've got padding and we had a margin left. Okay? So let's go over here and somebody help me specify this margin left. Let's go look at our box model. So we're going to cheat a little bit. So the margin, it says 100 on the left, and I've got just a hyphen for all the others, which means nothing. So just to practice what we just learned a minute ago, padding and margin can be expressed exactly the same way. So you've memorized it for one, you've got it for the other. So let's jump over here, and I want to specify this margin as the for style. So I want to say margin colon, and in those 4 numbers. But I only have one of them. So I've got margin left of 100. How do I say that? I'm going to get rid of this one, and I'm going to comment it out just for a second. And I'm going to replace it with margin. How do I say that same thing with the for style?
You put a number for the top, for 0 here.
So what have I specified so far?
The top and right.
Top 0, right 0, bottom 0, 2, and left. That is exactly the same thing. It's kind of redundant to have 3 zeros if I could just said margin left, but it's exactly the same thing. So I'm going to save that. File save. Yep.
So if it doesn't have an actual number, you don't have to put the PX.
Yeah, because 0 is the same in all the units. I'm a lazy developer. I don't put PX for zeros.
Okay.
It's the same thing. The question was, if you specify 0, you don't have to say pixels. Well, if I say 0 centimeters, it's still going to be a 0. So yeah, 0 works. Let's go back over here. I'm going to refresh. Okay? So it all works. No problem there. So you've learned something that you can carry through, and this is CSS specific, but it's important to understand there's more than one way to write something. And there aren't too many. What I've just taught you is kind of, it's a weird thing you're going to see in the code, but it shouldn't scare you, so I wanted to expose it to you. That's the only reason I showed it to you. There aren't others. You've seen important, the bang important, the exclamation important. That's the other weird one. And the reason we've covered the exceptions, the weird ones, is because not that you have to use them, but you know what they're doing. So more to read, not necessarily to write or to speak it yet. Okay, so we're talking CSS. Wouldn't it be nice? We started with a red box. Let's make that a circle. And I am shamelessly stealing this idea from Brianna. So I walked by and I saw her doing this, like, oh, that's what we're doing next. So with one CSS property, we can change this box, this rectangle, into a circle. You got to be clever to think about it, though. Can't do it with padding. What's the difference between a circle and a square?
Rounded corners.
Corners, exactly. If you think about it, let's see what, and there's rounded corners. If you take that to the extreme, let's do it one step at a time. So the CSS property, we haven't shared that with you, it's called border radius. And let's start with something small. So I'm going to say 8 pixels. Okay? So I'm going to save that. And we're going to see how our box looks when we refresh it up here. You see how it chopped off the edges? What that is, it's saying an 8-pixel circle radius right there. So if I have a larger number of border radius, say 20, it's going to make it more rounded. Take that to the extreme, where if your radius is right in the center of the box, you're going to chop that whole thing around there. Oh, by the way, we just learned margin and padding is top right, bottom left. How do you think this works if I just say border radius 1, 2, 3, 4? By default, you can specify, if I want to have just the top right-hand corner, this is a little bit different because you're not specifying top, you're starting at the top right, I believe. But there is another variance here for border radius. So if I want to say 0, 0, 0, you're going to see that. Sorry. File save. I got bad habits here. Reload. Okay. So this starts at the top left. You see how that one's knocked off, but the rest are still square. So let's take that and let's just experiment. Now that we've got it down here, let's go over to Styles. And I'm going to change that. Let's make it so that I'm going to make the radius start there and go to there. So I'm going to chop that entire thing off and make it look like a circle. And that's exactly what I saw Brianna doing a minute ago. How do you do that? Any ideas? Not Brianna. You don't have to use just pixels. You can specify things in EMs or percentages, which is very appropriate here. Sorry guys in Richmond, when I cringe, it's because the projector behind me is actually flickering, so nobody here sees what's going on. So right here, what do we do instead of 8 pixel to make that the whole side, make it a circle?
30%.
What's that?
Did you put 30%?
Let's try 30%. That looks pretty good. What would be all the way halfway down? 50%. Okay. So that's if we want to have like a rounded top. So it's gonna, we got 4 here. So let's do 50% and 50%. Look at that. It's like an eraser. So now we still have the bottom. Okay? Who would have thought you could have done that with CSS? But here it is. Now if I want to go back to the normal default style, just make 50% for all of them, we have a circle. You got to get that fixed. Okay. So let's talk about what do we do next? I want to make you feel comfortable with HTML and CSS. Why is CSS so important? CSS is so important because what did we learn yesterday? We learned about selectors in jQuery. So we tried to focus a little bit on CSS. And I was a little bit worried that we weren't covering some of the tags and some of the more complexities in how you specify hierarchies, because I knew where we were going. I knew we were going to get to jQuery. And CSS is bread and butter when you're talking jQuery, because you need to understand how to specify hierarchical paths, because that's all jQuery is. If you can't get the selector right, you can't do all the cool stuff you can do with jQuery, because you need to know what you're talking about. You need to find the right object. So CSS is important for jQuery, not because it's the same language, but because it's the same way of thinking. You need to think about the page as, how am I going to talk about that circle? This is a circle now. Well, there's only one, so if I wanted to talk about that one in CSS, it's a very simple way. I've only got one div on the page. So I can, in CSS, just say div. But if I had, let's make 2 circles here, okay? No tricks, I'm just going to copy and paste this thing. Remember, we did this temporarily, so I'm going to copy my border radius, and I'm going to put it into my real code.
I'm getting an oval with 50%.
Yeah, I just think this number too. But we have height.
Somebody said, I'm getting an oval with 50%. That's because I removed my height specification. If you still have your height on there, it's gonna be elongated.
Why doesn't width affect it then?
Um,
Did you have one or the other?
Good question. I don't know why width's not affecting it. So the question was, why is width not affecting it? Let's see if it even does. Wow, it does. It's, I think width is more constraining it rather than increasing it. So that's why we don't see the difference. Let's see what happens if we make it 400. Okay. I think it's because 200 by 200 we're a box, we're a square rather than a rectangle. But I don't know. Trial and error.
Yeah.
So let's go back and we're going to, let's make another red box. Let's make a blue box. Somebody tell me, and let's go back over here to my code. I'm going to get rid of some of this dead code. Is that all right with y'all? Or you want me to leave the dead code in there? I'm going to paste this after we're done. You want me to leave it?
No, you can use it.
Go ahead.
Okay. Actually, some people in Richmond are probably saying, wait, I wanted that. Let me, I'm going to put it over here for you. Let's see. There you go. Okay, now I'm going to get rid of it. So all I'm doing here, don't worry about me typing fast, it just, I'm taking and putting the code in here that we were playing around with in the browser. So, you know, this is going to be step-by-step about how you graduate from the style attribute to why you might want to put it at the top of the page. I think I shared this with Winston-Salem, but I don't think I mentioned it on the stream the other day. Who knows what DRY, the acronym DRY, means?
Don't repeat yourself.
DRY means don't repeat yourself. So if we're going to make a blue box now, your immediate inclination, and mine too, I'm going to copy that because I know it works, and I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to change this to blue box. We're done, right? Bad code.
You gotta change the color.
Yeah, we could change, yeah, let's change the color. Let's go ahead and do that. So which color do I change?
Background color.
It's the background color. So how do I make that?
0, 0, 0, FF.
Perfect. Why is that? It's because R, G,
Yep.
G, and then B. There we go. So I'm going to save that. Just to make sure that works. You know, no fancy stuff here. Let's make sure that is what we want. So I'm going to click over here, refresh, and let's see what it does down there. Yep, it's a blue box. It's not really a box anymore. I'm going to change that to say circle. How do we make the blue box or the blue circle over here rather than underneath?
Float right.
We could float right. So let's go back over here. And I want this one. Let's make it say what it is. It's a circle now. And we're going to say float. Okay. And this is the kind of thing, I have no idea if this is going to work or not. Because when you get into float, you're going to learn later on this afternoon how developers these days cheat and don't have to think about too much of the CSS interactions. Much like jQuery, and there's a library for that, there's a library for CSS too that we're going to show you called Bootstrap. But, yeah, it's, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth. Let's do reload. I'm going to use my mouse. So what I would do is float left. I'm going to float left. Oh. Float left for both the circles is what I'm going to try. Once again, I don't know if it's going to work. Could I do this by changing it in Chrome? Absolutely. Why am I not doing that? Because sometimes I'm slow. There we go. Save. I could just as easily do it over here. Okay. So red circle, blue circle. So let's make it so that this is going to be good code, not bad code. Can somebody tell me why this is bad code?
Because it's repeating that.
So Sasha's response was, and it's absolutely right, that's one reason it's bad, is we put everything in a style tag on the div, and we copied and pasted. So if I wanted to change one little property on both of them, I have to go to 2 places. So I'm doing double the work. If I had 4 circles, I'd have to go to 4 different places. I don't want to do all that work. So let's refactor this. That's a programmer word. That means take existing code that works and rearrange it to be better or more effective. So that's refactoring. So we know how to reuse CSS. Somebody give me an idea of how to reuse this rather than copy and paste it into the style attribute. The answer is, and Sasha's on point again, is create a class for it. And then you can associate the class to the HTML element. We know how to do that. So we're walking, jogging, and running. So walking is style on the attribute, a style attribute on the element. And that's perfectly fine. If you're going to use it one time in the page, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're going to use it in more than one place, you could copy paste and you see it works. All we did is change one of these CSS properties to make it blue background. But that's the wrong way to do it, because you copied and pasted all these things where you could have done it. Where do we put our style stuff? Let's put it in the head. Okay, so I'm not going to retype all this stuff because I don't need to. That's the whole point of code reuse. I'm going to select it, cut it, and sorry, I can't bring myself to use the mouse to do that, and paste it. And we don't have a class, and that's all wrong syntactically. So how do we add a class so we can talk about it? What do you want to call it? This is where you have to get a little creative as a developer. We can call it anything in the world.
Div style.
What's that?
Div style.
Div style. That's a little bit generic. Let's call it circle style. Remember your CSS syntax. We're going to create a class. That's what the dot means. And we're going to name it circle-style. CSS syntax says starting is a squiggly brace. How do you end it? Ending squiggly brace. Remember, whenever you write code, even if in CSS, you want to do a start and end, because if you forget that ending squiggly brace, it's important not to, because it's not going to know that it's closed. So when a computer doesn't see the closing marker, the ending delimiter, it's going to continue to read whatever's after that you didn't intend to be part of this scope, and it's going to misinterpret it, and you're going to have unknown types of errors, and it's going to be hard to figure out. So always remember to open and close your stuff. So circle style, and I'm purposely going to do this a little bit wrong. Sorry, it's have the flicker going on again. So right down here, we don't need the style tag. We're going to do that differently and cleaner. And also, one of the benefits you're going to see is it's easier to read. You don't have to sift through all the CSS properties. You can just say, what is this class? And then go look at the class. So the class is going to be circle-style. And what do you know? All of this goes away. I know some of you are saying, well, it's not exactly the same. You're right. That's exactly what I'm doing wrong here. So this is where we're going to go with it. Circle style. What's wrong? I'm going to save that, and let's see what I did. I kind of broke our page. So what did I do wrong here before we even look at it?
Colors.
Yeah. Aaron says the colors are actually, I said red and blue, and I copied and pasted the red one, but that was different for the blue. That's fine. I just want to make sure it works, but that's where we're going next. So I'm flipping over here, refresh. Okay, so now our blue circle's lying to us. Let's go fix that. So, how do we make it? There are multiple ways of making the blue circle blue. The nicest way might be like this. The one thing that these two circles don't have in common is the background color. So let's just take that one thing off. And let's give it to the div as a style attribute. We put it back here. That's one way to do it, and I'll show you another way in just a second. So, by doing it this way, a developer who can read CSS can say, okay, I've got a class in CSS that says this. It has all these things. I'm going to apply that class to multiple things on my page, both of my divs, and I can easily read right here. This one's red, that one's blue. But other than that, they are identical. This is clean code. This is something I don't mind looking at, because you've not repeated anything that you didn't have to. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to refresh it, and we have our blue circle back. That's one way to do it. Let me save this over to EM Editor, since you're going to have it for later. Okay. Another way to do this. Anybody have any ideas? Chris?
If you would have left the red up in the style that's in the head, wouldn't the blue have overridden it if you did the inline style in the div?
Absolutely, and let's go there next. So Chris was saying, if you had left the background color inside of the circle style, let's do that. I'm going to take it out of here. I'm just going to move it up here again. Oh, by the way, does it matter the order of these things? Absolutely not. Any order you want. Well, if I were to do something stupid like this, CSS is not going to complain. What's going to happen, do you think? It's going to be the black one, the last one. This is black, by the way, the absence of color. So CSS reads from the top down also. It's going to say, oh, you want background color to be red? Oh, you changed your mind. It doesn't make sense to ever do this. You see this in code as a bug. That's a CSS bug. So that's the only time it matters in sequence. Normally, if you write decent CSS and you only have each of these mentioned one time, it doesn't matter the order. So you've got a red background color. And what Chris was saying is that, you know, Ali, if you put that background color up there in the circle style and you let it be applied here, you let it be applied here and let it be overridden by style, this will work too. Why does it work? And this is very important. Because anything applied through a class association gets overridden by anything in the style attribute. So I'm going to save this just so you see that it does work. Okay, same thing. It is a little bit confusing that you have a blue circle and by default it's styled red, so you the developer reading this has to understand CSS overrides. And it's not bad to assume some competence from other developers reading your code, but you don't have to. You know, if you're going to make it easy to understand, which is better. I mean, you know, who knows what shape I'm going to be in 5 years? You know, I might need just a little bit of help to understand my own code. So let's make it easier for anybody to look at it and clearly understand what's going on. So instead of just having one class, let's have more than one class. There's no limit to the number of CSS classes you can apply. Let's have a blue circle and a red circle. And instead of putting it on the style tag at all, and there's nothing better or worse about this. All the things we're doing from the time we defined the classes and applied them both and had the style attribute, everything is equivalently good. Okay? So I'm not trying to sell you one way is better than another. But I am showing you multiple ways to let you know that there are multiple paths to arrive at success. All of these are fine. But you need to understand how to read them. And you need to understand how to use them depending on how you want to swing your hammer that day. This is where the creativity. I have a brother. He's in Northern Virginia. He works for a subcontractor of TSA. And he asked me, he doesn't know anything about code. He's like, how do you stand it all day, Allie? You know, you're just sitting behind a computer crunching numbers like a math whiz. Like, that's horrible. It's like, it's not like that at all, really. And I try to explain to him, there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of art in coding. It's more like writing books than it is about adding numbers together. Because when you confront yourself with a problem, you know enough, and I'm happy that you know enough to understand what I'm talking about now. You know more about understanding code than my brother does. So I can explain this to you, but I can't explain it to him, unfortunately. You have the creativity of choosing which path you want to trod to get to success. And that's where the creativity and the fun comes in coding. And if you've gone down one path long enough and you want to try something else, try it out. You know, have some fun. That's where the creativity comes in coding. In CSS, there's like this much leeway in creativity. When you get into larger languages, there are hundreds of different ways to do something. And that's where you have to kind of rein yourself in. Remember that clever developer that you're going to hate 3 or 4 years down the road? It's like you're going to want to go down that crazy path just to see if you can do it. You're going to do it once or twice and you're going to hate yourself for it. But go down there, it's fun the first time. So I was in the middle of copy and pasting. So that's blue, and we're going to do red. And it's not going to be quite right. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take the background color. It used to be on the circle style. Okay? I'm going to save that. And is this, what are we going to get if I go over to the browser right now? Anybody have a guess? What have I done wrong?
No background color in either.
No background color, but I just put it in my blue circle and my red circle. That's absolutely right, Richmond, because Winston-Salem can't actually see the screen right now. So I've created classes. There's nothing wrong with this at all. But I didn't tell my divs to be a certain class. Who can help me out and tell me, how do I tell this div to have more than one class at the same time?
Plus.
Space. Put a space here. And this is the red circle. And I'm going to do the same thing with the blue circle. That says apply both styles, not just one. And it's accumulative. So it's going to take all of the first one, which is common, and it's going to take the specific bit just for the blue. So I'm going to save that. There we go. Like I said, there's nothing better or worse about this. This is actually more code to write than the way Chris suggested, which is just let the blue override. So it's personal preference. Be creative. Do it however you want. As long as it works, who's to judge you? So, CSS, there is one more thing I wanted. It's already 11 o'clock, so I know we need to review a little JavaScript, but today is all about review. It's all about getting into things and understanding where we are. But hopefully this is, let me see a show of hands, is this a waste of time? Should we turn the dial back up and go back to JavaScript?
No, I'm not saying it's a waste of time.
Y'all ready for JavaScript? Okay. Let me, yeah, let's, I'm going to, let's finish up one more example in hierarchical CSS. We'll take a 5-minute break. I'm going to share the code that I've saved over here and I've been stingy with so far. And then y'all can take a look at that. We'll jump into JavaScript. Let's do one more thing here. Let's see. I'm going to create a span. This is... I'm going to create a span, and I'm going to give it a class of circle span. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to give each of our circles a little circle span. Okay. And I just put a little text in there saying hello. Okay, so nothing big here. I'm going to save it. All I've done is I've created a span inside of each one of our circles. And let's go look. I've saved it. Let's go over here and see what it looks like. Okay? Nothing big there. Remember, a span isn't displayed as a block. It's displayed as just a phrase. It's inline, is what they say. So just a word. I just happen to want to tag that word. Why might you want to put a little identifier with a span around a word?
Then you can change the properties of that span.
Somebody here spoke up and said, so that later on in code, in CSS or JavaScript or what have you, you can reference that particular word. It allows you to kind of have a bookmark to get there later, easily. So let's go over here, and that's exactly where I'm going. That's why I'm doing this. So up here, we've got the same class, and I want to say, the reason I'm doing this, I am going to make this a little bit complicated just to show you this is kind of how you need to think for jQuery selectors. That's why I'm spending a lot of time on CSS. Get good with your CSS selectors. Very basic. Class. A dot is a class in CSS. In jQuery, what is it? A dot is a class. Identical. ID in CSS, what is it?
Hashtag.
It's a hash. In jQuery, identical. Okay? If I wanted to be verbose, and I wanted to say, you know, it's not just any red circle class, it has to be a div. How do I say that? So right now, if I had a span or a p tag or any of the other HTML elements, and they happen to have a class of red-circle, it would behave like this. But if I want to make sure only my divs that have that class behave like this, how do I say that? I just put the word div in front of it. So it's divs dot, that means any divs that have the class of red-circle. That's all that means. I'll leave it there for you, because it doesn't change anything about the behavior of the page. So now, we want to talk about this. I want to change the background color of the circle span in our red circle to green, but only that one. Here's the challenge. Now, if I said go away and do that, you'd probably sit there for 10-15 minutes and you get a headache. I want to help you out. Let's work through this together. So, I want to make that background green. That's all I want to do. Tell me the complicated CSS selector syntax that happens to be identical to the jQuery syntax. So you see where I'm going? We're covering a lot of CSS. We're actually covering jQuery. You just didn't know it. I'm being sneaky there. So, circle-span. That's the class. But how do I talk about just the one in the red circle? Where do we start? Start at the top. First, we need to find our red circle. So how do we talk about our red circle? It's what is red circle? It's a class, right? So dot red-circle. I take it back. This room is not better.
Oh, you're going to be happy in a minute.
Okay. So dot red-circle is going to be, that is going to find any elements on this page that have that class. We only care about the divs, so you might as well say div.redCircle. So it's exactly the same as before. Okay? Now, if we want to talk about something inside of another element, how do you say that? Space. It's just a space. So space. Good. And what's the class that we're talking about inside of the red circle? Let's be very explicit. Not just with the class. Let's talk about the element also. It's we're talking about the text inside of the circle span inside of the red circle. Help me out. Chris, Melissa, Brianna.
Circle span?
Circle span.
Do span.
Somebody said that. but it's a class. How do I say class again? Yeah, I got to put a dot there so it knows that. And I'm going to be explicit. I could have a div or something else that's a circle span. I want to have only the spans. How do I say that? Span dot. Okay. So now it's starting to look a little crazy. You know, it's like a few minutes ago you would have felt like, do I know how to do this? Yeah, you do. You already did it. That's all it is. So what this says is find my red circle. Inside of that, that space is extremely important, by the way. If I did this, that doesn't make any sense. If I did that, doesn't make any sense. That means something different. That means something different. Space, okay? So span dot circle span. So find the red circle, find the span with the circle span class inside of it. Now what did I say we want to do to it?
So we gotta change the background color.
Change background color. And let's make it green.
00FF00.
Exactly right. RGB. So RGB. It's green. So I'm going to save that, and let's see how well we did together.
Hello.
Success. Sasha.
So when would you use the colon and why? An example like that.
The colon pseudo classes? Okay. The question is, when might we use a colon in CSS syntax and why? Colons are usually attached to behaviors. So if we wanted to, let's do that. Let's use the colon because that's a very good question. So let's make it so that when somebody hovers over top of our green span, we want to change it to black background. So we're going to show a pseudo class. And pseudo classes are usually, they allow you to do something that's not just present and show a certain display, but it allows you to behave a little bit and respond a little bit. Kind of like encroaching on JavaScript a little bit. It's not every day you use a pseudo class, but we're going to say exactly the same element. So I copied and pasted. And I'm going to say hover. Or I think that's it. We'll find out. Yeah. So the pseudo class is actually, and this is actually one of the hard things about using the Chrome debugger. Let's see if we can select that element and watch it kind of freak out when it doesn't even show it to us. It might be farther up. Yeah, it does try to change it sometimes, but it can't keep up because it's dynamic. I might be thinking about JavaScript. That's all that does. So a pseudo selector. Sorry, using my hand again. Let's go back over to our editor. So we've got red circle, circle span. All this is like, okay, that element, but also on that element, I want to do something when somebody interacts with it in a certain way. That's often how you do it, and most often in CSS. Unless you're like a designer and you do CSS all day long every day, you don't often see a whole lot of pseudo classes. Once again, you need to know what they are and know that you're not selecting when you're doing pseudo classes, you're actually telling it to filter on once you get there, only when this happens. Does that answer your question, Sasha?
Somewhat. I'm blanking. I thought there was another way, like say for instance, within the span you have like a paragraph tag to further identify the making changes to the paragraph tag. Was there a reason? Maybe I'm confusing myself. I'll think about it and ask you later.
Okay, we'll talk after. Okay. So, let's do something a little bit naughty to our users. This is the last thing, and then the reason I'm doing this is I want to get you into the habit of seeing stuff like that. Stuff like that. That is the kind of thing that you'll see in jQuery all the time. Because what you're doing in a jQuery, you're taking all of the elements on the page and you're trying to identify, I want to talk about that one, or all of the ones that match this. That's why it's called jQuery, because you're kind of filtering what you want to talk about, and that's the first step in all of jQuery. You got to find what you want to talk about with a selector. That's what these things are. It's the same syntax. So let's do, somebody help me out now that we have an example of how to select a span inside of the red circle. In the blue circle, circle span, when somebody hovers, I want to make it disappear. So let's, where do we start? Tell me your thought process so we can all follow along.
Which item in the blue circle?
It's the circle span inside of the blue circle is what we want to change. And only when somebody hovers over top of it.
So div dots. Blue circle. Span.
Space.
No space.
Circle span,
Dash span.
colon, hover.
Yep. So it's almost identical to what we did here, except
It's okay.
we're going to do something different. Instead of the background color, we're going to make it disappear. And that may sound, wow, how are we going to do that? It's one property. What do y'all think it is?
Height.
Yeah, those are all actually good and correct, and none of them are what I was thinking of. That just shows you can be creative and you can do things in multiple different ways. You could change the width to be way off the screen. You could change the height way off the screen, or top, left. You could change the height to 0. You could do all kinds of crazy stuff. You could, and there are two others that nobody mentioned it, but there are two other ways. One is display none. Another is, this one always kind of gets me. I don't know why they did this. Visibility hidden. And they are different. Display none makes it really disappear. It's not on there. That place in the page, if there's things after it, it's going to kind of fill in. Like when you take a barrel out of water, that water kind of floats in to fill that space, the void left by the barrel. Visibility hidden is like the invisible man. The invisible man is still there. He's taken up space and he has mass, but you just don't see him. That's the difference between the two.
Why do you have quotes around hidden?
That's one of the things. So the question was, why do I have quotes around hidden? The answer is because I feel like this is a very poorly planned CSS property. How do you make it visible? You actually say visibility visible, which is really verbose, and it's a string. It's like, I'd never use this unless I really need like a big blank spot in a page, and sometimes I show it, sometimes I don't. That's the only time I'd ever use that. So I'm sorry I introduced that. But the reason, to answer Kelly pretending to be a student's question, the reason is that this CSS property needs a string. It's not set as a keyword like the others. So let's just do it with display none. I'm going to save this, and we're going to take a break before I get a stroke because this thing's flickering on my side vision.
It's going to be working.
Okay. So I'm going to refresh the page, and oh. Yeah, talk about having a stroke. So, what's happening there? Can anybody explain what's going on?
Both of the codes that you wrote for display none and visibility visible.
The browser's freaking out because as I hover, it says display none. But then it realizes, oh, it's no longer meeting the criteria because it's not hovering anymore. Let it back out. It's like, oh, you're hovering again. Yeah. Yeah, you really want to screw with your users. There you go. So, the point of this discussion, this. You need to learn how to do that. You need to know what that is. And I don't have to say div. I don't have to say span. What's the difference? I just did that. Is that still going to work? Yeah, it's still going to work. It's just more general. It just means I don't care if the class blue circle is applied to a div or a span or a p tag or an italic tag. Doesn't matter. I don't care if the circle span hover, circle span's class is associated to a specific element. It's any of them. By default, it's any unless you specify it. That, perfectly valid, but that means something different. That says only find the p tags with the circle span class inside of, space means inside of in this case, any elements with the blue circle class. Okay, so that's the net of CSS. Get that. You don't have to memorize all the tags. You can get that over the next year or two. But you do have to know how to read it. You have to know how to find the elements. And there's only two ways, really. It's ID or class. And when you choose between them, ID, you usually have just one on the page if you're doing things right. Class, you can have as many as you want. Now, as an aside, we're not going to do it, but anybody have any idea of a really nice way to make this even better? And I'll explain very briefly why it's even better.
Put your styles in a separate sheet.
That's absolutely right. The answer was, you could take this style, instead of saying style type is equal to text CSS, you could take all this and save it in a separate file and then do the link, and I think it's href. I always have to look that one up, and it's like href. It's like that's the file name for my CSS, and take all this out of here. Why is that better? It seems like I'm hiding my own code for myself. Why would you do that?
Multiple pages.
The answer, exactly right, Stevenson. You can make things faster. And I'm a speed freak if you haven't figured it out. So, make it faster. So, if you can take it out of this page, put it in a separate file, and you reference it with one line of code in your normal page, why is it faster?
Because the browser doesn't have to load the entire thing.
Blake has it right. Because the browser will not load it again. It's going to cache my CSS file. So if I've got an enormous CSS file that's 5 megabytes, and it's referenced, what the browser is going to do, it's going to go see, do I have the latest, or am I going to assume that I have the latest CSS? And 9 times out of 10, yeah, because you haven't changed anything since the last time it saw that. So instead of loading that again and fresh and pulling that down over the internet wire, it's going to use what it already has in your temporary internet files. That's what that stuff is. And it's going to reload just your main page because it has to. So all of this you kind of get for free. Just the magic of modern browsers. That's why it's a little bit faster. Is there a huge difference? Not at all. But, so yeah, it's bothering me too. So, that said, any questions from Richmond? Put it in the, oh, it looks like we do have a question. Okay, no. We don't have any questions. So, I'm going to turn it over to Balin. Do you need to talk with the whole group or just Winston-Salem?
Just was
It's something specific to the logistics of this facility. So let me stop the stream. Harper, it's all yours for Richmond.